Across America, people who live in RVs are waking up to a shocking reality.
Conditions are as bad as you can imagine. Makes sense why the outreach teams want to get people out of these RVs. But we've learned that even once these RVs are hauled away, the problems don't disappear.
After a December court judgment, their homes on wheels are being tagged, fined, and towed away.
Seattle City contracts with Chuck to haul away RVs after they're abandoned or residents are moved into housing from encampments.
For many, this RV is all they have left. How did surviving become illegal? Who is truly affected by this decision? Join us as we uncover what is really happening. The day everything changed. Across many American cities, the same scenes began to appear again and again. Large white notices were taped to RV windows. Bright stickers warned of towing. Police trucks and tow vehicles lined quiet streets early in the morning. Some RVs were moved. Others were left behind, empty and broken, with doors open and belongings scattered. For many people living inside these vehicles, this was not a traffic issue. This was the loss of their home. For RV dwellers, the vehicle is not a choice of comfort. It is shelter, storage, and safety all in one place. Inside a single RV, people sleep, cook, keep medicine, store work tools, and protect important documents. For retirees on fixed income, working families priced out of rent, veterans living on disability pay, and gig workers trying to stay employed, the RV became the last stable option. Without it, there is no roof, no address, and often no way to keep a job. This changed after the December court judgment that reshaped how cities can treat people living in vehicles. Before this point, many RV dwellers believed they were surviving within the rules. They parked legally, moved when told, and avoided crowded areas. RV living had grown because housing costs rose much faster than pay. Over the past decade, rent prices increased by more than 50% in many cities, while wages grew far slower. RVs became a bridge between housing and homelessness. After the judgment, that bridge collapsed. Cities gained stronger power to enforce parking bans, camping rules, and vehicle habitation laws. Overnight, RVs were no longer seen as shelter but as violations. What had once been tolerated became punishable. Many people woke up to tickets they could not afford. Others faced towing warnings with deadlines measured in hours, not days. The financial pressure was immediate. Fines often reached hundreds of dollars per ticket. Tow fees added even more costs. Storage fees increased daily. Most RV dwellers do not have savings. Studies show that nearly 60% of Americans cannot cover an emergency expense of even a few $100s. For someone already living in an RV, these costs were impossible. Once the vehicle was taken, getting it back became unrealistic. The impact spread fast. Losing an RV means losing shelter, but it also means losing stability. Without a vehicle, many people cannot commute to work, apply for jobs, or attend medical appointments. For gig workers, delivery drivers, and temporary laborers, transportation is income. For older adults and people with health issues, it is survival. A single enforcement action pushed many directly from vehicle living into street homelessness. The central question now stands clearly. How did living in a vehicle become illegal in a country facing a housing crisis? And who truly pays the price for that decision? And also, what exactly did the courts decide? And why did cities move so fast? The court judgment that changed everything. The December court judgment did not appear suddenly, but its impact was immediate. It followed a growing legal shift that changed how cities can enforce laws against homelessness. In simple terms, the ruling allowed cities to apply camping bans, parking limits, and vehicle habitation rules even when no shelter space is available. This removed a key protection that unhoused people relied on for years. Before this change, many courts held that punishing people for sleeping outside or in vehicles was unfair if they had nowhere else to go. Cities often had to show that shelter beds were available before enforcing strict bans. This created limits on how far enforcement could go. The December judgment weakened that standard. Cities no longer had to prove that safe alternatives existed. This legal shift gave local governments stronger protection from lawsuits. Cities could ticket, tow, and remove RVs with far less risk of being challenged in court. For city officials under pressure from residents and businesses, this ruling offered a clear path. Enforcement could begin quickly, and in many places it did. Within weeks, cities updated enforcement plans. Parking time limits were shortened. Overnight restrictions were expanded. Vehicle habitation bans were applied more aggressively. RVs that had remained in the same area for months were suddenly targeted. Enforcement moved faster than outreach or housing solutions. The language used by cities focused on public safety, cleanliness, and access to streets. Officials pointed to blocked sidewalks, sanitation concerns, and emergency access. These issues exist, but the real-world impact fell on people with no alternatives. When an RV is removed, the problem does not disappear. It shifts to another block, another city, or another form of homelessness. RVs became an easy focus for enforcement for several reasons. They are large and visible. They stay in one place longer than tents. They can be identified, ticketed, and towed using existing vehicle laws. Unlike building affordable housing or expanding services, towing an RV is fast and immediate. The system favors speed over solutions. The scale of homelessness makes this especially serious. National counts show more than 650,000 people experiencing homelessness across the country. A growing share live in vehicles because shelters are full or unsafe for families, couples, or people with disabilities. In many urban areas, vehicle living increased by double-digit percentages over the past few years as rent climbed and wages lagged behind. Cities acted quickly because the ruling reduced legal risk. Once enforcement began, it spread. RV dwellers received multiple tickets within days. Some areas used automated plate readers to track parking time. Others relied on complaint-based enforcement, meaning one report could trigger towing. But why were so many people living in RVs to begin with? What pushed workers, families, and retirees into vehicles? The answer starts with housing costs and lost stability. Why people turned to RV living in the first place? RV homelessness did not appear suddenly. It grew slowly as housing became unreachable for millions of Americans who were still working, still paying bills, and still trying to stay stable. The core reason is simple and measurable. Housing costs rose much faster than wages, and the gap never closed. Over the past decade, median rent across many major cities increased by more than 50%, while average wages rose by less than 30%. This imbalance pushed many people out of traditional housing, even though they were employed. Single workers were among the first affected. Entry-level and service jobs did not keep up with rent increases. A worker earning minimum or near minimum wage could no longer afford a one-bedroom apartment in many cities. Housing experts estimate that a full-time worker now needs to earn more than twice the minimum wage to afford average rent in several states. When rent takes more than half of monthly income, eviction risk rises sharply. Many single workers chose RVs because rent became mathematically impossible. Families were hit next. Rising rent meant that one income loss or one medical bill could collapse an entire household budget. Even two-income families struggled as childcare, food, and transportation costs rose at the same time. Once a family falls behind on rent, catching up becomes extremely difficult. Eviction records then block access to future housing. RV living became a temporary answer that often turned permanent. Seniors on fixed income faced a different but equally harsh reality. Social Security payments did not increase at the same pace as rent. Many older adults spent decades renting, only to be priced out late in life. With limited savings and long wait lists for senior housing, RVs offered independence and shelter at a lower monthly cost. For many seniors, it was not a lifestyle choice, but the only option left. Affordable housing also disappeared at a steady pace. Older apartment buildings were renovated or converted into higher-priced units. New housing construction focused mainly on luxury or high-end rentals. Public housing waitlists stretched for years. In some cities, fewer than 1 out of 4 low-income households could access affordable units. This shortage forced people to seek alternatives outside the traditional housing system. RV living filled that gap. It became a last resort that still offered dignity, privacy, and safety. Compared to rent, RV expenses were lower. Monthly costs often included fuel, basic maintenance, and occasional parking fees, which were still far less than market rent. RVs also allowed people to keep their belongings and avoid shelters that were overcrowded or unsafe. Another key reason RV living grew is employment access. Living in a vehicle allows people to stay close to jobs, move quickly for work, and avoid long commutes. For delivery drivers, temporary workers, and seasonal laborers, mobility is income. RVs made it possible to remain employed while technically homeless. This created what experts call hidden homelessness, where people are unhoused but not visible in shelters or street counts. Housing pushed people into RVs, but jobs pushed them over the edge. What happens when income suddenly disappears? That is where the next collapse begins. Mass layoffs, unemployment, and the collapse of stability. Job loss is one of the fastest paths into homelessness, and recent years have shown how fragile employment has become. Across multiple industries, mass layoffs increased sharply. Tech companies reduced workforces after rapid expansion slowed. Retail chains closed stores due to online competition and falling consumer spending. Logistics firms cut jobs as shipping demand dropped. Media companies downsized due to declining advertising revenue. Manufacturing faced automation and global pressure. Each wave affected thousands of workers at once. When layoffs happen, the impact is immediate. Most households live paycheck to paycheck. Surveys show that nearly 60% of Americans cannot cover a small emergency expense without borrowing. Missing one paycheck leads to missed rent. Missed rent leads to late fees. Late fees lead to eviction filings. Once an eviction appears on a record, future housing access becomes extremely limited. This chain reaction often unfolds within weeks, not months. Unemployment benefits rarely cover full living costs. They are temporary and often delayed. Health insurance tied to employment disappears quickly. Savings drain fast. Credit cards fill the gap until limits are reached. Credit scores drop, making deposits and approvals harder. At this point, traditional housing options vanish. Vehicle living becomes the fastest available alternative. The gig economy added another layer of instability. Many workers rely on app-based jobs with no guaranteed hours, no benefits, and no job protection. Income changes week to week. When demand drops or accounts are suspended, earnings disappear instantly. Gig workers often use their vehicles as tools for income. RV living allows them to stay mobile, reduce expenses, and continue working even while homeless. Laid-off workers choose RVs for practical reasons. An RV keeps them off the street. It allows them to take delivery jobs, travel for temporary work, and stay near job centers. It provides a place to sleep without paying rent they cannot afford. For many, it feels like a temporary step until employment returns. However, long-term unemployment is rising, and short-term layoffs often turn permanent. Data shows that even a brief job loss can change a person's housing future. Missing one rent payment increases eviction risk dramatically. Once displaced, returning to stable housing becomes far harder. RVs became the final buffer between employment and street homelessness. When that buffer is removed, people fall much faster. Job loss pushes people into RVs, but enforcement is pushing them out. So, which states are hit the hardest? The pattern becomes clearer when we look at the map. States hit hardest by RV homelessness. RV homelessness does not affect every state in the same way, and the differences are shaped by climate, housing costs, job access, and local laws. Certain states have seen much higher levels of vehicle living, and these same states moved quickly to increase enforcement after the December court judgment. The pattern is clear when state data, city policies, and geography are examined together. California has the highest number of people experiencing homelessness in the country, and it also has one of the largest populations of people living in vehicles. High housing costs are the primary driver. Median rent in many California cities doubled over the past decade, while wage growth failed to keep pace. Even full-time workers earning above minimum wage struggle to afford housing. Warmer weather allows year-round vehicle living, which made RVs a common survival option long before the court ruling. After the judgment, many California cities expanded parking enforcement and increased towing activity, especially in coastal and high-income neighborhoods. Oregon and Washington show similar patterns. Both states experienced sharp rent increases driven by population growth, limited housing supply, and strong job markets centered around major cities. Portland and Seattle became hubs for vehicle living because jobs were available, but housing was not. Public land, wide streets, and industrial zones allowed RV parking to grow quietly over time. After the ruling, local governments moved to clear long-standing RV areas, often citing safety and sanitation concerns, while shelter capacity remained limited. Arizona and Nevada represent a different but connected pattern. These states attract RV dwellers because of warmer climates and lower winter risk. Many people moved there after losing housing in higher-cost states. Cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas have large service and tourism economies that rely on low-wage labor. Workers can find jobs quickly, but still cannot afford rent. RV living allowed people to stay employed while homeless. Enforcement increased rapidly after the ruling, particularly in tourist corridors and near business districts. These states also share another feature: large job markets that pull people in faster than housing can be built. Migration increases demand, rents rise, and lower-income workers are pushed out of formal housing first. RVs fill the gap created by that imbalance. Once enforcement increases, the pressure shifts onto people who have already exhausted other options. Local ordinances play a major role in how enforcement happens. Many cities use overnight parking bans that limit how long a vehicle can stay in one place. Others enforce anti-vehicle habitation laws that prohibit sleeping inside a vehicle. Some areas rely on complaint-based systems, where one report can trigger tickets or towing. These rules existed before the ruling, but the judgment made enforcement easier and faster. Enforcement also differs sharply between urban and rural areas. Urban centers have more complaints, higher visibility, and stronger pressure from businesses and residents. RVs in cities are more likely to be ticketed or towed quickly. Rural areas often have fewer resources for enforcement and more tolerance due to space and lower population density. However, as cities crack down, RV dwellers are pushed into surrounding rural zones, spreading the issue rather than resolving it. Tourist cities enforce rules more aggressively than industrial towns. Tourism depends on appearance, visitor comfort. RV, homeless are losing. Losing the RV equals losing everything. For people living in RVs, towing is not a minor penalty or a temporary inconvenience. It is a complete collapse of stability that affects every part of daily life at once. When an RV is taken, the person does not just lose transportation. They lose their home, their storage, their safety, and often their connection to work and healthcare. Inside most RVs are all personal belongings: clothing, food, identification papers, medications, work tools, and family items are stored in a very small space. When towing happens, people are rarely given enough time to remove everything. Important documents like birth certificates, job records, and medical paperwork are often left behind. Replacing these items can take months and requires stable contact information, which most RV dwellers do not have. The financial impact begins immediately. Tow fees are high and increase quickly. Storage fees are charged daily, sometimes reaching hundreds of dollars within a short period. Fines connected to parking or habitation violations continue to add up. For someone already unable to afford rent, these costs are impossible. Studies show that most Americans cannot afford a sudden expense of even a few $100s, making recovery unrealistic from the start. Because of these costs, many people never reclaim their RVs. Once fees exceed the value of the vehicle, towing companies may sell or scrap them. At that point, the loss becomes permanent. Without an RV, people lose their shelter and their mobility at the same time. This pushes them directly into sidewalk homelessness, where risks increase sharply. Living on the street is far more dangerous than living in a vehicle. Exposure to weather, illness, theft, and violence rises. Access to clean water, bathrooms, and safe sleep disappears. People who are managing to work while living in an RV often lose their jobs because they cannot maintain hygiene, keep schedules, or travel reliably. What began as a parking issue became total displacement. The emotional toll is severe. Fear increases because there is no longer a safe place to rest. Shame grows as people feel blamed for circumstances beyond their control. Hopelessness sets in when recovery seems impossible. Mental health stress rises sharply, especially for seniors, veterans, and people with existing health conditions. The system creates a trap. Enforcement removes RVs without providing housing. Fines and fees prevent recovery. Loss of transportation blocks employment. Without income, housing remains unreachable. If enforcement makes everything worse, why does it continue? What happens when punishment replaces solutions? Why just go to a shelter does not work. The idea that people living in RVs can simply move into shelters sounds simple, but in reality, it does not match how the shelter system actually works. Shelters were never built to absorb the growing number of people displaced by high rents, job loss, and vehicle enforcement. In many cities, shelter capacity falls far below need, and this gap has grown wider as homelessness has increased. When RV dwellers lose their vehicles, shelters are often already full, understaffed, or unable to accept them. Across the country, emergency shelters regularly operate at or near capacity, especially during colder months or extreme weather. Large cities may have thousands of unhoused residents, but only a fraction of that number in available beds on any given night. Smaller cities and suburban areas often have even fewer options, sometimes relying on seasonal shelters or short-term programs that close during parts of the year. When enforcement removes RVS quickly, shelters cannot expand at the same speed, leaving many people with nowhere to go. Shelters are also not designed for everyone. Many facilities separate people by gender, which forces couples to split up and makes it difficult for families to stay together. Parents with older children may be turned away or told to separate. Seniors often struggle with bunk beds, shared sleeping areas, and long lines that require standing for hours. People with disabilities may find that shelters lack proper access, medical support, or quiet spaces needed for health conditions. Pets present another barrier. Many people living in RVS keep pets for safety, emotional support, or companionship, especially seniors and those living alone. Most shelters do not allow animals, and giving up a pet is not a realistic option for many. As a result, people choose to stay outside rather than enter a shelter that requires abandoning a companion. Safety concerns also keep people away. Shelters are crowded environments where theft, conflict, and illness are common risks. Shared sleeping spaces make it difficult to protect personal belongings, including medications and documents. For people with past trauma, mental health conditions, or anxiety, the lack of privacy can make shelters overwhelming and unsafe. RV living, while unstable, often feels more controlled and secure than a crowded indoor facility. Health risks increase in shelter settings, especially during outbreaks of illness. Close quarters make it easy for sickness to spread, and people with weakened immune systems face higher danger. Some shelters require residents to leave during the day, regardless of weather or health, which disrupts rest and recovery. For someone trying to stabilize their life, this constant movement adds stress instead of relief. Employment is another major obstacle. Many shelters have curfews that conflict with night shifts, early morning jobs, or irregular gig work. Long intake processes can take hours, causing people to miss work or interviews. Shelters are often located far from job centers, increasing transportation challenges. RV living allows people to stay near work, store tools, and keep a routine, which shelters often disrupt. Because of these limits, shelters function more as short-term emergency spaces rather than paths to stability. They are not housing, and they do not replace the role that RVS played for many people as a bridge between homelessness and recovery. When enforcement assumes shelters can absorb displaced RV dwellers, it ignores these realities and creates a false solution. The result is predictable. People removed from RVs attempt to access shelters and are turned away, discouraged, or unable to stay. They then move to sidewalks, underpasses, or unsafe areas where visibility is lower, but danger is higher. Street homelessness increases, even though the original goal was to reduce it. The system counts enforcement as action, but the outcome shows failure. This misunderstanding also affects public perception. When people hear that shelters exist, they assume help is available. When they see people still sleeping outside, they assume refusal. The truth is that many people are willing to accept help, but the help does not fit their needs or circumstances. RV living filled gaps that shelters cannot, including privacy, mobility, and basic control over daily life. Until shelter systems are expanded, redesigned, and connected to real housing pathways, removing RVS will continue to push people into worse conditions. Shelters alone cannot carry the weight of a housing crisis. Treating them as the default answer allows deeper problems to remain unsolved. If shelters cannot replace RVS, and enforcement removes both, what remains? Why does the system keep repeating the same mistake? The answer explains why this crisis keeps growing, why this crisis is spreading, not ending. The RV homelessness crisis continues to grow because the main response focuses on punishment instead of solutions, and this approach has been proven over time to make homelessness deeper, longer, and harder to escape. When survival behaviors like sleeping in vehicles are treated as violations, the system targets people for being poor rather than fixing the conditions that made them homeless in the first place. This shift changes homelessness from a housing issue into a legal problem, which creates more damage than relief. Criminalizing poverty means using fines, tickets, arrests, and towing to control homelessness instead of addressing its causes. These penalties do not create housing, jobs, or support. Instead, they add financial and legal burdens to people who already lack resources. A single citation can cost hundreds of dollars, and repeated enforcement can lead to criminal records. Once a record exists, it becomes harder to rent housing, find work, or qualify for assistance, which pushes people further away from stability. One of the biggest failures is the lack of affordable housing. Across the country, there are far fewer affordable units than people who need them. Housing experts estimate that for every 100 low-income households, fewer than 40 affordable homes are available. This shortage forces people into shelters, vehicles, or the streets. Enforcement does not increase housing supply, so removing RVs simply moves people without solving the shortage. Mental health services are also deeply limited. Many unhoused individuals struggle with stress, trauma, depression, or untreated conditions that make stability harder. Public mental health systems are underfunded, understaffed, and difficult to access. Waiting lists can last months or even years. When enforcement disrupts people's lives, mental health conditions often worsen, increasing the need for care that remains unavailable. Job retraining programs are another missing piece. Many people experiencing homelessness lost work due to layoffs, automation, health issues, or economic shifts. Without access to retraining, it becomes difficult to re-enter the workforce at a livable wage. Enforcement interrupts job searches, causes missed interviews, and removes transportation, which makes re-employment even less likely. Enforcement also pushes people from city to city. When one city cracks down, RV dwellers move to nearby areas in search of safety. This movement breaks community ties, support networks, and local knowledge that help people survive. Churches, outreach workers, food programs, and informal support systems become harder to access when people are constantly displaced. Homelessness becomes more scattered and harder to track, not smaller. This constant movement increases costs for local governments. Cities spend money on police time, towing contracts, court processing, and cleanup. Studies comparing enforcement costs to housing solutions consistently show that punishment is more expensive in the long run. Emergency room visits, jail stays, and repeated enforcement cycles cost taxpayers far more than stable housing or support programs would. Stability becomes harder to regain after enforcement because key foundations are lost. Criminal records limit job opportunities. Loss of transportation blocks access to work, training, and healthcare. Without an address, applying for jobs or benefits becomes complicated. Each enforcement action removes another step toward recovery, turning temporary hardship into long-term homelessness. If this path is clearly failing, who is next in line to fall? How close are everyday families to this edge? The final chapter answers that question. What comes next, and who is at risk? The RV homelessness crisis is no longer limited to a small or isolated group. It is expanding into the lives of people who once believed they were protected by steady work, savings, or age. As housing costs remain high and job security weakens, more Americans are moving closer to the edge without realizing how thin that edge has become. Working families are among the most vulnerable. Many households rely on two incomes just to meet basic expenses. When one income disappears due to illness, layoffs, or reduced hours, rent quickly becomes unmanageable. Childcare, food, and transportation costs leave little room for emergencies. Families who fall behind often face eviction within months, and once displaced, finding new housing becomes extremely difficult. RVs have become a temporary fallback for some families, but enforcement removes that option. Seniors are also at growing risk. Fixed incomes do not adjust fast enough to match rent increases. Many older adults rent rather than own homes, and affordable senior housing has long wait lists. Health expenses further reduce available income. RV living offers independence and shelter, but when vehicles are taken, seniors face extreme hardship, including exposure and medical risk. Recently laid-off workers represent another growing group. Job markets change quickly, and layoffs can affect entire industries at once. Even skilled workers may spend months searching for new employment. Without savings, housing is often the first thing lost. RVs allow people to remain mobile and seek work, but enforcement removes that safety net and pushes people directly into street homelessness. This crisis is no longer fringe. The line between housed, vehicle homeless, and street homeless is shrinking. A missed paycheck, a medical bill, or a job loss can move someone from stable housing to crisis within weeks. What once seemed unthinkable now happens quietly across cities and towns. The question facing society is simple but urgent. If losing a job can cost someone their home, and living in a vehicle is now illegal in many places, where are people supposed to go? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.